So problem solving a little bit, what are things that you might want to consider if you are wanting to do this on your campus, or also already doing it but facing some challenges? So as I think about this type of work, the quote that always really comes back to me is that college students represent the future leaders of our society. Therefore, identifying the health concerns and behaviors that impact their lives may result in approaches to health education and prevention that have societal as well as individual impact. So it's really starting to think about the mental health and well-being of college students as a public health issue, as something that reaches far beyond just what we're seeing in college and university settings. And a little snapshot of mental health. So I work at an American institution. So the numbers that you see on your screen are representative of the US, but I did do a little bit of digging into the statistics for Canada, and I was able to find the same assessment, the National College Health Assessment, only this one happens to be from 2016. So just to outline a little bit why this is important, why this is something that diverse stakeholders need to be paying attention to, is that in Canada, 82% of students feel overwhelmed by everything that they have to do. 65% experience overwhelming anxiety. 46% reported feeling so depressed that it was difficult to function. And 97.9% suffered academically either due to anxiety, depression, or stress, right? So these are alarming numbers. We know that students are experiencing greater need than they have in the past. And that means that institutions now inherit the responsibility of figuring out ways to support them. And what's really alarming to me about these numbers, and again, this is from the US, but that 70% of these students haven't received services on their campus. So even though these growing numbers of students are having these experiences, they're then not receiving services that they need on their campus. So something that you can kind of put in the chat box as we're going through and thinking is, what are the greatest challenges that you're seeing on your campuses with students? So as you consider these statistics and thinking about what do we do about that? Legislators are concerned, administrators are concerned, faculty are concerned, parents are concerned, is thinking things have to be done differently. And so what can we do to be more proactive about meeting these students' needs? And so I was reading an article from Inside Higher Ed, and something that I really liked was that they really stressed the importance of developing coping skills. So prevention in terms of providing students with the opportunities to actually learn the skills that they need to succeed as students. So more about how I developed this class. So I was a doctoral student in occupational therapy, and I was really looking at how could occupational therapy fill this gap in unmet need, right? How could we support students in the ways that they weren't getting support currently? So first I conducted a needs assessment. I did a comprehensive literature review, really like a deep dive into all things college student mental health, well-being, program development. And then I also did a needs survey. So I really wanted to find out from students what they were expressing their needs are, and then also what did they want to be done about it? If there was a class that existed, would they take it? If that class did exist, what would they want to be covered and what would they want it to look like? And so from there, I started to develop the curriculum itself. I had the privilege of being in a class at the time that was an adult learning theory and curriculum development course. So I was already getting this sort of structured support on what it looked like to create curricula. And so within that, I was able to start brainstorming and creating logic models for what that might look like, what course topics were going to be addressed based on what students were telling me distinct to my campus, but also from what the literature was saying and other people at other institutions were saying and what students around the globe are expressing that they need. And also creating the learning activities. So really being intentional about what is the teaching going to look like. So if we know that the way things are run right now isn't working, I didn't want to just do more of the same. I wanted to pay attention to how it was going to be delivered in addition to what was being delivered. And then I piloted that course. So the first iteration was 11 students. I collected data throughout the process, pre-surveys, post-surveys, mixed methods, qualitative. I'll talk about it more later on in the webinar. And then from then use that information to develop continuing courses. So that one pilot course with 11 students has now grown to 4 sections offered every semester with 25 students in each class. So every semester here at UIC, we reach about 100 students through this course. And the idea is to then continue to grow it and also to create other iterations that maybe look a little bit different and can meet student needs in different ways. So as I was thinking about the course, what really drove me was thinking about what are the benefits of a course model. So some of these things are that you can reach a large number of students. So I do cap mine at 25, but regardless, that's 100 students that you're reaching every semester just by this one course alone with one professor, right? So then the magnitude, if you think of breadth and how many other students could be reached if it was grown and developed, it's larger than just providing individual counseling or group counseling. It's a low cost to the university as well. So typically the people who teach courses are already hired by universities. Their departments already have funding for them. Also thinking about reducing barriers to the utilization of services. So here at the University of Illinois, we have extremely diverse students. Most of our students are first-generation college students. They come from very diverse backgrounds, a lot of low-income students who are on full scholarships or Pell Grants. And so there are also cultural barriers to help seeking. So really trying to understand the supports that students need, but also what is a model of that delivery that they will actually utilize. So if students are not overcoming the barrier of wanting to seek therapy and they're not utilizing that service, how else do we need to reach them? If they have 4 jobs and they're commuting to campus and they can't go to a counseling center appointment or a wellness center after their academic classes, how else do we reach them? It also provides opportunities for social engagement. So something that I've noticed kind of trending over time throughout my own experiences as a student and then now as an instructor as well, is that students are interacting with each other less. So even if they're in classes together with the same people, different people, large lecture halls, small interactive classes, they come into class, they're on their cell phones, they take the class, they leave. And so the opportunities to engage with each other, to build social networks of support, are not as present as they were in the past when people actually engaged face-to-face with each other. And so when you have a class that really focuses on reflection, focuses on discussion and building skills and problem solving together in small groups, you have the opportunity for students to really develop connections that last them throughout their academic career and ideally beyond as well. It's also thinking about a needs and skills-based perspective. So we're understanding what their need is, but then we're addressing those needs by focusing on the skills that they need to succeed in those areas. Something that I find really interesting is that what I've seen in research, and that I'll talk a little bit about later too, and just thinking about models that we offer on universities typically, is that when we provide course credit for something, we are communicating that as an institution, we care enough about this to give you course credit for it. And what would that experience be like for a student if you really felt like, oh, wow, okay, my institution is genuinely invested in my health and my well-being and how I'm going to succeed as a student? And how might that then allow you to kind of flow through your academic experiences differently when you feel supported by your university and you don't feel isolated and you feel like you have mentorship and you're gaining skills? It's also more equitable for diverse students, and I'll go into that a little bit more. And you have potential for improved health, academic success, and increased retention. And this is something that's shown in the literature, and it's also shown by the evidence that I've started to collect as well. So really positioning well-being as an equity issue. And so we know that students are coming from really vast backgrounds, and they have vastly different lived experiences, and partly that is due to their own intersectional identities and the greater structures of inequity that exist in society in general. But we need to acknowledge these differences, acknowledge that the students coming in are different than students before, and then adapt to those changes. And so if we want to provide supports and care and mental health services that are actually equitable, we need to think about well-being both as an academic matter, so tied to measurable outcomes like retention and graduation rates, but also thinking about well-being as an intellectual pursuit, a valuable intellectual pursuit, right? Valued in the same way as anything else that students want to study. And so we see a lot of evidence for social emotional learning. And ideally, this is something that would be elementary school, middle school, high school. But the reality is that that's not something that we're seeing. And so pushback sometimes that I get about creating courses that offer credit for these things, people will say like, well, those are skills that students should be learning in their homes. And that's an inequitable assumption. So to make the claim that students already learn these skills is assuming that they are coming from a home where parents either know these skills themselves to be able to teach, or that they have the time to teach them. So it's a reality for many of my students that their parents are, just like them, also juggling multiple jobs and children and other roles, and don't necessarily have the opportunities to teach these skills, or maybe themselves didn't have the opportunity to learn those skills and aren't necessarily coping successfully themselves either. And so the idea behind that is that if we assume that students have already learned these things, we're not actually providing equitable access. We're only saying that students who have had the opportunity to learn these skills can succeed here. And then also thinking about equity in terms of accessing the supports. So here at UIC, this was something that I really needed to consider, because what students were telling me is, we don't have enough counseling services, but even if we did, I don't have time to access them. So typically the way it works is a student might get waitlisted to go to counseling, and then they'll get a phone call that they finally get to go, and they're offered one appointment time. And that one appointment time is during one of the 3 part-time jobs that they have, or one of the classes that they can't miss. And so thinking about, if we offer things in an academic format where they're getting credit and then it's worked into their schedule already, they can actually access those services. It's not something that's outside of school, that's outside when they might be commuting or working or doing other things. So from there, thinking about all these things, thinking about the need, thinking about the diversity of the students and what the structure can look like, what came out of that was OT 360, what's now OT 360, or Promoting Wellbeing. It's offered at the University of Illinois, and it's through the College of Applied Health Sciences and through the Department of Occupational Therapy, because that's the department that I work in. But students from all across campus take this course. It's not limited to students within that college. So kind of basics of what the course looks like is, it's an undergraduate and graduate elective. It's 2 credits. I typically get majority undergraduate students, but I have had both master's and doctoral students take the class as well. We use a semester system here at UIC, and so the course is 16 weeks. It meets 1 time a week for 2 hours. When I did the pilot course, it was 8 weeks, and it met twice a week. And I cap it at 25 students because I've found when I've tried it as greater than that, students don't feel as comfortable sharing in class. And the cultivation of a safe and comfortable space to be able to talk about these topics, I think, is one of the most impactful elements of the course itself. And so when I limit it to 25 students, even though then I'm potentially shrinking the breadth a little bit per semester, I think it enhances the quality of the experience for students. And also for the instructor as well. So thinking about the type of support you want to be able to offer within that class, and realistically, how much could you spread between more students than 25? And there are 4 sections that are currently offered every semester. And then I also have this model where students who were formerly, people who were formerly students can then serve as undergraduate TAs in subsequent semesters. The course components. So the way it typically works is we will do a background and content education for a certain topic, really kind of like psychoeducation. Why is this important? What is the scientific background? Why is it relevant to you? What does research say about it? Brief intro in the beginning of the course content. And then we'll do skills practice. So in-class activities. And something that repeatedly showed up in the literature is that supervised skills practice is one of the most important elements for success for teaching health behaviors. And so there is a lot of research about people who have tried to create behavior change to enhance the wellness of students through courses. And the evidence that exists isn't necessarily showing as much impact, right? And the ones that are showing that we are giving them opportunities to practice these skills and opportunities to receive feedback, direct feedback, ongoing, while it's happening in real time on their participation in these things. And then they're also doing skills practice at home and reflecting on it. So as an example, we might practice certain mindfulness activities in class, and then they'll go home and do an independent exploration of these things and reflect on which of these work for me, which fits into the context of my life, how is this impacting my health? Is this something that I want to continue? And so those are also kind of the main elements of class: reflection, discussion, peer engagement. We have small groups, so students come into class, they immediately are formed into their small groups. They talk about their weeks, they talk about the readings that were assigned on that topic, they problem solve things that they've been going on for their action plans that they submit every week, what challenges, how can they support each other in developing strategies to overcome barriers. And so they really do have an opportunity to work with each other. And then it's in a larger group. So that's when we would then introduce the content area for that week, a little bit of background behind it, practice it, do it at home and reflect, and then come back with those reflections on what they learned. An example of a session topic, some of the session topics, so it's 16 weeks. So these are obviously not all of them, but these are some. So time use and self-management, stress, mindfulness, emotions and regulation, relaxation, restoration, and sleep, effective communication, healthy relationships and social engagement, substance use, impact of movement and food. And so we really try to make each one of these sessions as interactive as possible. So how are we practicing effective communication? How are we giving students an opportunity to break up into pairs, to then look at barriers to effective communication, where conflict typically arises, and then in that moment in class where they can get feedback, implement strategies to change the way that they're responding. This is just one sample of an activity that I do in class. So this is the time use diary and a balance wheel. This is built off of occupational therapy principles. So in occupational therapy, when we're really focusing on habits and routines, there's something called the occupational questionnaire. I sort of adapted that questionnaire to what I wanted students to focus on specifically. So if you see the kind of graph looking on the bottom, that's the start of what students would complete. So every hour throughout the day, they're gonna address what they did, where they did it, who they did it with, were they doing anything else? So were they multitasking? Were they on their phone? Were they watching TV? What do they consider it to be? Is it play? Is it work? Is it leisure? How much do they enjoy it? How well do they do it? So really tapping into that idea of competence, and then also how important is it and how does it make them feel? So in this activity, we're really trying to get students to be more mindful and intentional about how the way they're using their time is impacting their health. So paying attention to how certain people that they spend time with might be impacting their health over time, how certain activities that they're doing might actually not be the most conducive to their health, and the ones that are, how can they find ways to prioritize those things? And so they'll take the information from that time use diary, and put it into a visual representation of their time. So that's what this balance wheel is. So then they have a visual of this chunk, this pie piece of my day is spent in this way. And I actually want to feel more competent during more parts of my day. So how can I then make changes to do that? They submit SMART goals, so an action plan. They'll have both a SMART goal, barriers, supports, their confidence level. So every other week, they're submitting something that they want to accomplish and doing that and tracking it throughout the entirety of the semester. So then thinking about how do we know if it's working? So I think that data collection has been probably one of the most important elements for me, both in developing something that I think is impactful, but also in getting buy-in from stakeholders on campus. So I did both a mixed method, so qualitative and quantitative. And really the research objective, kind of this like alphabet soup here, is I wanted to know if these credit-bearing courses work. Are students actually acquiring skills, and do they have enhanced confidence? So this enhanced confidence piece is also important. When I did literature reviews, I was finding that some wellness courses that existed were showing that they were not successful, that they didn't actually have impactful change. And the common thread that I saw throughout this is that people were measuring symptomology. And so they were saying, as a result of this class, did students' anxiety decrease? Did students' depression decrease? And part of why I didn't want to measure that is because I'm not a psychologist. But the other part is because I'm not convinced that it matters. So I think students' context isn't changing, and for a lot of people, their experience navigating mental health challenges and mental illness won't change either. And so to me, what was more important than if the symptoms themselves changed was, does their confidence in their ability to manage those things change? So as a result of taking the class, do they feel more confident to manage their mental health, right? To engage in all of these health promoting behaviors. And so what I really focused on in all the areas was self-efficacy. So there were 39 quantitative indicators. I did a pre-post survey, and what I found now, so there were 74 students that I had both pre and post data for across multiple semesters. And what I found was that there was a statistically significant increase for every single one of the 39 indicators of self-efficacy. So some of these indicators are directly related to self-efficacy of things that we did in class. So their confidence in their ability to practice mindfulness strategies, things of that nature. Some of them were already existing instruments, such as healthy lifestyle beliefs and behaviors. And so what I found particularly interesting, some of these notable indicators were the largest changes from their pre to their post were in the self-management of stress, practicing mindfulness, creating specific and realistic goals, accomplishing goals, developing social support networks, and utilizing student counseling services. What I think is really interesting about that last one is that part of the development of this course was taking into account that students aren't utilizing counseling. And then knowing that then after taking this class, their perceptions of utilizing that service have then changed. So is this then something that can be used, not necessarily as a gateway to counseling, but as a way to capture students that are falling through the cracks and aren't utilizing that service, but then the ones that then want to and need to, as a result of this education and reduced stigma surrounding mental health and well-being, then feel more comfortable accessing services when they need it. And also these other indicators as well. So some of the things related to healthy lifestyle behaviors and beliefs were not as directly tied to what we did in class, particular eating habits, things like that. But these really were the main goals of what I wanted to accomplish in class, because these were the things that students were telling me they were having the hardest time with. So they couldn't manage their stress. They didn't know how to get everything done that they needed to get done. They felt isolated and didn't have a sense of belonging. So these things are changing. Their confidence and their ability to do these things are changing from before they took the class to after. This small graph here was just from the pilot survey, but in the post from the pilot course, but in the post survey, I asked students, compared to 16 weeks ago, how do you feel about your ability to implement strategies to manage both physical health, emotional health, and then academic roles and responsibilities? And so this is something that's captured in the indicators, but I also wanted to see if that was different. So are students realizing how much that they've changed? And what I found is that they are. And so 100% of students reported that they feel more confident in their abilities to manage their health and their well-being, with 90% of them saying significantly more confident and 10% of them saying more confident. So that wasn't necessarily representative of the other semesters. I haven't gone through that data yet from that particular question. So that is from the pilot survey, and what I'm hoping, based on the fact that all of these indicators are notable, that will be the same result. So qualitative impact. So for this, I had more students who participated in this. I lost some to follow up with the quantitative. So I had 166 students that provided me with qualitative data across 3 semesters and 8 different class sections. And the most prominent themes that emerged from this were skill acquisition, enhanced confidence and personal control, the prioritization of personal mental health and well-being, academic performance, social and peer support, cultivating an inclusive classroom, and the development of additional courses. So I'm not going to go through all of these just because there are so many themes, but some of the quotes that I'll share with you from students that I feel demonstrate the impact. So For skill acquisition, a student said, I believe that this course contributed to the development of skills to support my well-being as a college student. I feel like I now have the tools to better succeed emotionally, physically, and academically. For the prioritization of personal mental health and well-being, students said, this class made me actually set time aside in order to improve my well-being and mental health. I started to take care of myself and realize how important my mental health is and how much it affects what I do every day. And for academic performance, a student said, without this class, I'd be a mess right now. But instead, I'm so on top of everything, I have all A's in my classes. So really thinking about how this is impacting other elements, how it is an academic matter. Well-being is directly connected to these things that have measurable success. So the process for implementation. So if you are already doing it, that's wonderful, and I really want to hear about how it's going and how that looks on your campus. For people that are maybe thinking that this is something that they want to implement, what I would really think about is understanding need. I also just want to back up for 1 second because there's something that I didn't focus on as much. So within the quantitative research, what I forgot to mention is there is a really interesting dynamic for underrepresented racial minority students. And so at UIC, what that is considered is Black students, Latinx students, and Native American students. And so what I found really problematic and troubling was that for 66% of the indicators, URM students scored lower than their white and Asian counterparts on the pre-survey, right? So that's demonstrating a huge need and also kind of validating the argument of well-being as an equity issue. And what was interesting too then about looking at the data post-class was that for then 36% of the indicators, the underrepresented minority students that started lower than other students were then higher than them in their post-survey. So that was just something I wanted to mention as well. So I'm gonna kind of mosey on back down to implementation. So what I've learned kind of throughout this process is that understanding the need is crucial. So you might know the general need across students in varying campuses, but it's going to look different and there are going to be distinct needs for your students. So what I really suggest is conducting a needs assessment. You want to gain insight into their specific needs. And then you want to develop the appropriate format. So this is a format that worked for my students. So I wouldn't necessarily recommend you doing the exact format that I do because your students are going to be hugely different than my students. So really making sure that you're tailoring the structure of the curriculum or the program to these specific needs that you identified in your needs survey. And then piloting it. So offering the pilot version kind of gives you an opportunity to test it out, to pilot the course and really see what works, what doesn't, what do you want to change before you roll it out more broadly. And then once you have done that, growing it. So offering larger courses potentially across multiple sections, recruiting students to engage and to take your class. So that's kind of the ideal version of what it would look like. That's not necessarily, it didn't go as smoothly for me in my process. And so I want to talk a little bit about things I learned sort of along the way and ways that I've troubleshooted it. So one of the biggest things for me that I got pushback about was that I was essentially reinventing the wheel, right? That I was offering things that were already offered on campus and therefore it didn't necessarily deserve funding because it already existed. And so what then became really crucial to the development for me was carving out a distinct value. So I did that by finding out specifically what every service was offering on campus and how they were offering it, and then figuring out how could I then package what I'm doing and make the things that I'm offering fill the gap in what other services aren't providing. And so something that I would ask you that you can also share in the chat as well is what needs are not being met by your current existing campus services? So to really start to reflect and think about that before you create the content. And then from there, evidence, like I said before, I think is absolutely huge. So you want to produce impact data that will actually demonstrate the value and the need of what you're doing. When it's pretty hard to negate hard facts, to negate data that's showing that things are working for students. I think ideally, if this was something that was a larger project that I had funding for, I would track all different sorts of outcomes related to academic success that I know that administrators are really concerned about. So I would look at things like retention from year to year, graduation rates overall, right? Not just the indicators that I'm looking at. And I think that in itself really ties into collaboration. And so that is a huge thing that I've learned as well. So I started this project as a doctoral student and developed it and did much of the work by myself. And while I've started to collect different units on campus that are invested in this work, I can only grow it out so far, being the only person right now who offers it. So right now I teach 4 sections of the course. I also teach another course, so I teach 6 times a week. I can't teach any more hours. And so then that limits the amount that I'm able to offer the class because I didn't collaborate enough with other people who can also offer the class. And so kind of moving forward, what I'm hoping to do is train other people to offer it as well. Partnering with other academic departments too. So that's been really helpful because when they see the impact, they're able to advertise it to their students. So while it started more within the Applied Health Science College, now I have students in faculty in the design school who really advocate for this class, in the STEM departments. So really partnering with other units so that the growth of your program is more successful. Also, connecting it to other related initiatives can be really helpful, particularly when you're thinking about funding. And I think the idea here is that the more champions that you have around your class, around your program, the greater sustainability you're going to have. So whether you're there or not, this is something that flourishes. Whether you can teach at that class that semester or not, it's something that can continue to exist. And along that line of champions, something else that I've noticed or learned is absolutely finding those champions and following them wherever they are. So the counseling center was not a unit that was particularly invested in the work that I was doing when I started. The units that were interested were the Office of Diversity, and that's what I followed. And so they've been hugely supportive of the work that I do, also helping me connect it to their own initiatives of providing culturally relevant practices and services and supports to all of the students that we have here on campus. And so while I wouldn't necessarily have gone to the Office of Diversity initially to look for support, it's been where I've actually found the greatest support on my campus. So kind of being creative and strategic about who are you reaching out to, and even if it's not something you might have considered, seeing if there's room there for collaboration and how that can contribute to your sustainability plan or your growth plan for your class and your program. And then also building demand. So it's been really helpful to kind of generate a buzz around the course. Students are connected in that way, right? So they might not be connecting as much in person in courses, but they certainly are connected on social media platforms. And so students that have taken my class that have really enjoyed it, I don't use those platforms, or I don't interact with students on those platforms. And so I didn't know until recently that my course was being shared on Facebook pages for UIC class of 2020, things like that. Someone told me that they found out about my class because somebody posted about it on Twitter. So encouraging students to share on different outlets, potentially yourself and the different mediums that you use, sharing on different outlets. So going to students where they are and saying, here's a support that exists, here's something that you might be interested in. So that might be through units on campus, but it also might be outside of school and connecting with them in other ways. I think thinking about this too, something else that you can share within the chat would be, what challenges do you anticipate navigating, or what challenges, if you're already starting to do this, are you currently navigating? So sort of key takeaways would be that the integration of wellness courses can enhance accessibility, equity, and the utilization of mental health support. Also, that understanding the specific needs of students on campus is crucial to designing effective courses. And then lastly, that gathering evidence that demonstrates the impact and collaborating with campus partners is key to growth and sustainability. So that's sort of my experience. I think on the note of finding champions as well, I want to say thank you to CICMH and Perlin and Asiri and Geraldine from UpSocial and Kelly from the McConnell Foundation, who have really been wonderful advocates for the work that I'm doing and validating the work that I'm doing. If you are interested in connecting, my contact information is available below. I would love to chat with you about the work that you're doing. And if you have questions, this would be a wonderful time to get that conversation started as well. So Perlin, I'll give that to you.
That was amazing. Thank you, Leah, for the wonderful, really informative presentation. Like, thank you so much for the work you do.
Thank you.
I really like the point that you tried to make earlier about when we're looking to evaluating work like this, and it's not about necessarily reducing symptomology, but it's sort of increasing gatekeeper training and access to the services in a way, right? You're trying to not just catch them at the end when they're in crisis, but catch them at the start just to be aware of, hey, here are all these things that you need to be aware of before you get to that point.
Yeah, definitely.
Mm-hmm. So we do have a couple of questions rolling in for you. Top question is, people are very interested to see if you're able to share your course curriculum.
Yeah, I get that question a lot. And so I've kind of been exploring this too, even when when you start to think about things that I didn't consider before, like intellectual property and who actually owns my course. I do have to check with my department to make sure that's something that I can do, but yeah, I have no problem sharing kind of what the full course topics are and what that schedule looks like. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think that'd be very helpful. I think there's a real hunger for that. We had a couple of questions on that. Uh,
Yeah.
another thing, because you mentioned collaboration of other faculty and other departments, do you generally find that like people are open to that, that there is this sort of the recognition of that need that it needs to be done?
Yeah, so I think that there are kind of already champions that exist that are doing this work sort of silently in their departments. So the more that you are able to also speak about the work that you're doing, more people can hear about it and then connect with you. So I had someone recently who is in the biomedical visualization department and sent me an email saying, "This is going on for our students. I didn't even know that someone at UIC was doing this work. Can we chat?" And was kind of the point person for their department for students that were experiencing mental health challenges. And so kind of became this like by proxy sort of advisor, counselor, therapist, when that's not what she is. She's a designer. And so I think that there are professors, there are advisors who care so much about students and are already starting to kind of do this work on their own without support. And so it's building a community of those people who are all doing that work, and then potentially either building a course together or just partnering with them to offer things like this more broadly. So that's a long answer to your question, but I think, yes, I think people are already doing it and are extremely invested in it. And I haven't talked to one person who works in academia that doesn't see this as a growing concern.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a recognition that mental health is a growing concern in the post-secondary environment.
Yeah.
Moving off, sort of as a follow-up to that question, how did you get buy-in from senior administrators? So how did you get this course started? Who did you go to at your university to say, this is a great idea, I want to do it, and how did you get that buy-in?
Yeah, so I was really lucky in that way. So within my occupational therapy department, there are things called special topics. So professors often offer different courses related to different clinical topics in occupational therapy, and so there's sort of flexibility within those topics. And while I had a lot of departments that were interested in the course that I wanted to offer, there's still this kind of whole administrative academic process to go through to get courses approved that can often take up to 2 years. And so I was really lucky that my advisor was able to just create a section of a special topics course. And so the pilot was that. And then because the pilot was so successful, I was then able to use that evidence to show, like, essentially our academic senate that this was something that should be an actual course with its own course name, and submitted the paperwork for that. And then once that was approved, it no longer had to be a special topics course and it could be its own course. So it did initially start not as its own real course, but as this special topics course that kind of allowed me to wiggle into academic units.
And I think that's the way it's going to work
I
at a
do
lot of
see.
institutions. You have to.
Sorry.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, just I see someone in the chat asked, had I had any thoughts about making it mandatory, and I think that that's a great question. So that's kind of the next step of what I'm trying to push for. So we have things called first year seminars, and so I think that this is a great opportunity to integrate some of these things. So even if it's not the entire course, thinking about how else could the course look, or how could certain content be delivered in other ways. Maybe it's through peer support programs, maybe it's through these first year seminars, maybe it's through orientations that students take or retreats that they have before they start college. So really being creative about where can those things go. So my role right now is in teaching, but I'm trying to sort of transition part of the structure of what I do into being more initiative focused and being able to grow it out in ways that reach just beyond this class. And one of the priorities that I have for that is definitely thinking about how could something like this be mandatory? Yeah.
Absolutely. Next question. Do students get marked for this course? Because it's a 4 credit course. And if they get marks, how do you evaluate it?
Yeah. So it's a 2 credit elective. We've talked about making it 3, but that would have to, then the amount of time that we met would have to increase. So I'd have to sort of adjust. But so right now it's 2 credits. And the way that I grade students is essentially on participation and reflection. So I've sort of had some learning moments from that too. I do a lot of work also in inclusive teaching. So thinking about how can we deliver, so it's not just about the content, but it's about how we're delivering it. So thinking about the classroom environment, thinking about accessibility. So when you offer more assignments, more opportunities for students to succeed throughout the semester instead of 2 large assignments, it's actually more equitable, right? It's more accessible to students. There's not just 2 things that they're being graded on. They have multiple opportunities to succeed. So I do that for that reason, but also so that they are engaging the entire time with every content. So it's a lot of activities that they do. The first 2 times that I offered the course, I just had everything due at the end of the semester. So I did that because students are in academically rigorous courses. I also was thinking about them as an entire holistic person. So a lot of them have jobs, they might be parents. So we have a lot of non-traditional students. So I want them to engage with the content, but it doesn't really matter to me when they submit it as long as they're engaging with it and doing it. So I made the due date the last day of class. And some students liked it, and some students didn't submit anything, and I had to fail someone, and that was a terrible experience for me, and I hated doing it so much that then I sort of built in some accountability. So now I have a midpoint and an endpoint. So half of the activities and reflections are due at the midpoint, and then the other half of the activities and reflections are due at the endpoint. Then they also have things that are due throughout the semester as well that have more like hard due dates. So those are the action plans. So every other week, students submit an action plan. So that's the goal, potential barriers and supports, and confidence level. So they get credit for that. And it's not just based on completion. They do have to have an actual SMART goal format. So students will often say things like, I want to go to the gym. And so they'll get points off for that because they've already learned the structure of what a SMART goal looks like, and they need to continue implementing that throughout the semester. And then the other thing that I do is I call them KDs, which are knowledge demonstrations. They're like very easy quizzes essentially that I provide on Blackboard. So those are kind of the content based because the majority of what I do is reflection based. I think another element that has been important for the class is providing some flexibility around how they participate. So it's not a public speaking course. My teaching objective, their learning objectives are not how to learn how to speak in front of people. And so even though one of the assignments does involve a presentation, I do provide other opportunities for them to present their knowledge and their reflections in a different way. So I do things called exit tickets where students who maybe didn't speak up in class or don't feel comfortable doing that can write reflections on a card and then give them to me after class. So that's a way for students who, whether it's social anxiety or just that they don't feel comfortable, still have an opportunity to engage and reflect. So these are all sort of ways that I start to evaluate. I do, so the activities, that the example of one that I gave you, so that time use diary with the balance wheel, that would be an example of an activity. And then the reflection that would go with it would be another assignment. They do an identity paper. So it's a lot of assignments throughout the class related to the content that we're doing, and that's what I grade them on. So essentially, if students show up to class, they're engaged, they submit everything, the ideal is that they learn skills and they can get an A. So when I've had students that haven't done as well in the class, it's because they didn't submit things.
That makes sense. Um, we have a question about when you mentioned doing a needs assessment on your campus. Do you have any specific tools or specific sort of forms that you use for that you would recommend?
Yeah, so I did this as part of doctoral research. So I had an IRB, and so I kind of went through that process of things had to be approved through that. So I had a survey that they approved that I sent out to students. I did it through Qualtrics because then I could disperse the link more easily. So that was the platform that I used. But I think I also did student interviews and focus groups as well. So I think that really being a little bit creative and thinking about what is a needs assessment, so not just quantitative data, but also thinking about, are you observing students? Are you interviewing students? How are you finding out what it is that they need and what it might look like?
Could you give an example of some of the questions that were in those needs assessments?
Yeah, so one of the things that I asked students at the end of the assessment was if a course was offered that provided opportunities to address these topics, and then I listed some of the topics from the class, would you take it? So that was a way for me to then even show when I was trying to get the class to be its own class to say, this many students are already expressing that this is something that they need and want to take. I asked questions related to if they felt supported by their university. I asked some qualitative questions related to belonging. If people are particularly interested in the need survey, they can email me as well, and I can send them the specific questions. I don't want to exit out of Adobe to open up the need survey now, and I did it over 2 years ago, so I'm forgetting the exact wording of the questions. But if any folks are interested in that, you can definitely send me an email, and I can give you more specifics.
Amazing, thank you. We probably have time for a few more questions. Is this course being offered in a particular? I think what they mean is it being offered only to a specific set of students? So, for example, only students in a certain department or a certain year, or is it available to anyone at university, whether they're a part-time student, full-time student, etc.?
Yep, anyone can take it. So it's a 2 credit elective, and I've had really, really different students start to take it. And again, I have had undergraduate students, master's students, PhD students. I've had some people that were postdocs that audited the class. So it's looked very, very different. And it's not only for some departments, it's anyone across the entire university.
How do students hear about the course?
Yeah, so I create a flyer. So I distribute those typically through department listservs. So I will email the College of Applied Health Sciences. I'll email the College of Liberal Arts advisors. I'll email contacts in the psychology department, in the design department. So that's been really crucial too when you think about champions and about growing your program. and collaborating with others is really connecting with folks across different units on campus so that they can then be champions for your work as well. So within all of the academic units, within the Office of Diversity, within our Disability Resource Center, within the Counseling and Wellness Centers, they get posted through our cultural centers. Then I'll have students who liked the class who will post it through their student organizations. Again, students have done a lot of that legwork for me. I have a former TA who I call my best PR agent because she posts it everywhere. She posts it on Facebook, she's been posting it on Twitter, and I didn't know that these were things that students were doing. So I think those are the ways that the word has gotten out the most. And then when students have really positive experiences in the class, and I don't even think that it's necessarily related to the content, to be quite honest. I think in some ways it is. It's a space where students are talking about topics that they're not talking about outside of class. But I even just think having a course where students feel supported, where they feel like they have a direct connection with someone who is potentially providing mentorship instead of kind of a more distant professor role, when they start to feel like they're a part of something and they're paying attention to their health every week, I think those are some of the things that make it so successful. And then the actual doing as well. So practicing the skills and doing them at home. So I've seen some models where it's mostly talking. So it might be like a seminar type of model where they bring in experts from different areas to speak about things. And just what I've seen from my research and from the literature as well is that supervised skills practice is that key component. And so I think then when students take a class where they're doing these things and they're having interactive experiences, they enjoy that and then kind of do that advertising and recruitment for you.
Do you have any thoughts about a train the trainer model to embed this into first year studies as part of a general orientation for university courses?
Yeah, that's absolutely something that I've thought about. I think there are a lot of models that have come out of different working groups that I've been a part of recently across different campus units, that being one of them. And I think right now, kind of my barrier is just that my only role is teaching, and I don't really have as much room for program development within my current role. And so I think that really ties into what I was talking about in terms of having other champions. So you're not going to be able to be the one who does all of the things. And so thinking about who are other people who you can collaborate with who might be doing that work in other ways. So right now, those aren't things that have come to fruition, but absolutely, we thought about a train the trainer. We thought about a peer model. So sort of like a train the trainer, but training students who have previously taken the class and potentially who are upper level students to be able to provide some version of this course in a peer support model. We've thought about sort of orientations that happen before campus. We've thought about required training. So how could it look potentially if students are required to take some sort of element where they engage with this content before they can register for courses? So I think once you kind of get into it, your mind can really be really, really broad about what that means in terms of embedding it into curricula. And it's just a matter of what works on your campus and what you're able to kind of get the ball rolling on.
The world is your oyster.
Yeah.
So I think we have time for maybe two more questions, and they're quite simple. One is the course available during the summer?
It is not currently available during the summer, but that is sort of a logistical issue, is that I'm clinical faculty, so I only have a 9-month appointment. So that isn't because of any intentional design. That's just because I'm not paid to work over the summer, so the class doesn't exist in the summer, to be quite honest. I do think though that that's a great time where it could be offered. So particularly when students are taking less loads, or I know when I was an undergraduate student, I did a summer before I started my first fall semester. And so I think those are great times to help orient students to campus and even just get them prepared for everything that they're about to experience. So I think summers and also summers before their first fall freshman semester are great opportunities to do things like this. And did you ask another question?
Oh no, I haven't asked it yet, but the second
Oh, okay.
question was just, have you published your work anywhere? Because someone wants to show their colleagues.
Yeah, so I've done a lot of conferences, and then most recently was accepted to present at a international conference in Switzerland. It's Well-Being in Education Systems is the conference. So some of that will be published, and then right now it's just compiling my data. So I have a little bit of a manuscript, but it hasn't been published yet. And everything else that's been published before has been a little bit more informal. So there's a platform called Thrive on Campus, which is from Thrive Global. That's Huffington Post kind of spiral off new publication related solely to health and well-being topics. So their Thrive on Campus platform has been wonderful with publishing the work that I'm doing, and not necessarily publishing about evidence, but also just getting people to think about these topics, about whose responsibility is it to address mental health of college students, things like that. So those have been a little bit more informal platforms as well. But again, if you're interested in seeing some of those types of things, you can absolutely send me an email and I can share those links and those platforms with you.
Amazing. Well, thank you again so much for sharing your work. It's amazing. And thanks for taking the time to chat with us and showcase all of that. For everyone who's on the webinar, and thank you for attending. And what's going to happen from here on out is a recording of the webinar and the presentation slides are going to be made available on our website, so you can go and download that and watch it anytime you want if you wanted a refresher on this webinar. As for what's coming up next for the center, next month we are having a webinar also related to faculty. We're going to be talking about how, say, so a course like this is specific to mental health. So we're going to be talking about, in general, what can faculty do to sort of adapt their curriculum so that it's more equitable for students, and how faculty can help to support student well-being in general, even if it's not a course that's directly related to mental health. So that's happening next month. Watch out for the follow-up email that's going to come tomorrow with your slides, your links, and as well as the link for the next webinar. All right. Well, thank you so much, Leah, once again.
Thank you so much, and thank you for attending. And please email me, connect.
For sure. Well, have a wonderful day, everyone, and we'll see you next month.